What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is a little bit of an echo out there. It's Tuesday, October 24th, 2017. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. Much nicer day here in Hawaii than it was yesterday. We were under thunderstorms. Today it's light and cloudy, a little bit of sprinkles. More thunder showers due later in the week here. So let's get right on into it. Hillary Clinton is finally having to acknowledge the growing groundswell of rage, disgust, and shock over the Uranium One deal. And she's already out there saying, it's baloney. It's politically motivated baloney. There's nothing there. There's really nothing there. It's just baloney, 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 baloney. The story has been debunked thoroughly. Just like all those women who accused Bill Clinton, their stories have been debunked repeatedly. Well, they've been declared debunked, but that's a far cry from actually debunking them. But apparently the panic is really setting on in because they're very, very concerned about this. Now, interestingly enough, we just put up a flashback video from the Western Journalism Center all the way back in 2015 talking about this. And then as now, the corporate media ignored the story, but it was out there in 2015. We've known about this a long time here in the independent media. And WikiLeaks released a Podesta email dated April 29th, 2015 with the subject line, "It's out there," basically saying that they knew Uranium One was a major scandal in 2015 and they had to move to control it, block it. So more and more of this is coming out, and it looks like more and more people were involved, a lot more money than just the Russians. But basically, for those of you who are coming late to the discussion, here's what it was. Rosatom, which is the state-owned Russian uranium mining processing company, wanted 20% of the uranium on U.S. soil. Now, that 20% was already owned by a Canadian mining company, kind of a shell company. Just came out of nowhere, all of a sudden got a lease on that 20% of uranium ore. And the executives of this shell company wanted to sell this to Russia. But because uranium is a U.S. national security product, various U.S. federal agencies and numerous individuals have to okay the deal. One of those agencies is the U.S. State Department, then headed by Hillary Clinton, and her department says yes to the uranium deal. Now, we already know that something like $140 million from Russian sources poured into the Clinton Foundation. But here's the icing on the cake. Those Canadian mining executives who wanted the sale to Russia to go through also donated millions more to the Clinton Foundation. Now remember, Russia, now that they have that uranium, they can process it into fuel rods for nuclear reactors. They can, if they wish, process it into warheads. They can turn around and sell that uranium to other countries who may not like the United States, like, North Korea or Iran or pretty much everybody these days. That's why it's a national security scandal. And everybody's paying attention to this. The Hillary shills are out there trying to call into radio shows saying, it's a distraction. There's nothing there. It's baloney. It's political. We have to go back to Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia. And even Dianne Feinstein has been forced to admit on TV after all the money and time spent trying to find some link between Donald Trump and Russia, they haven't. All they keep finding are these links between the Clintons and Russia. So now we have two more Republican-led congressional committees that are probing the Obama administration's decision to approve the sale of American uranium production capability to a Russian state-run energy conglomerate. Representative Devin Nunes, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, said he'll be linking up with the House Oversight Panel led by Representative Trey Gowdy. Go, Trey, go, Trey, go, Trey. The Senate Judiciary Committee has already said it will investigate the uranium deal. And this, of course, is infuriating the Democrats and the liberals who are saying, oh, it's a big nothing burger. You know, Hillary didn't do anything illegal. She's sweetness and light and morality itself. And again, as far as that attempt to link Donald Trump with Russia, all those investigations are coming to an end. They have not found anything. They haven't found anything. So now Hillary Clinton is out there with her fake scandal having morphed into a real scandal. Remember, she was behind this thing, find a link between Trump and Russia, and Robert Mueller was looking at that, and all of a sudden he stumbled across the Podesta group that was lobbying on behalf of Russia for that uranium deal without registering as a lobby for a foreign government. So that is getting really ugly over there as well. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining our network. Now, according to Charles Ortel, he's the guy who's really been digging into the shady dealings of the Clinton Foundation. And he's saying that if nothing else, these pay-to-play schemes, which have been documented repeatedly in leaked emails, pried loose with Freedom of Information Act lawsuits, this justifies an all-out inquiry into the Clinton Foundation. And there's another reason. To qualify as a 501c3 charitable foundation, more than 50% of your revenues have to go to charity. The Clinton Foundation has spent single digits of its wealth on charitable endeavors, usually in front of news cameras to say, we're charity, see, we're doing nice things. And meanwhile, we're finding out the Clintons were using it as a personal piggy bank. So there should be an investigation. The problem is there was an anonymous FBI person who was posting to the web some months back saying everybody in D.C. is dirty with this. Everybody was using the Clinton Foundation as a tax avoidance scheme, as a slush fund, dark money. And there are a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who do not want this to come on out. So we're going to see some major league stonewalling, like we're already seeing over at the Department of State, where they're stonewalling the release of Hillary's emails. Oh, we've only got another 40,000 to go. Take us 20 years to get through them all. Meanwhile, over at Fusion GPS, this is the opposition research company that manufactured that now discredited dossier that claimed Donald Trump and two prostitutes were doing icky things in the Moscow hotel. And it's been completely debunked. There was nothing to back it up. And this company is known to basically make this kind of stuff. They're basically political dirty tricks company, professional. Well, now they're ducking the subpoena from Congress. Congress wants to look into who paid for all of this, where did it come from. And Fusion GPS is refusing the subpoena, saying that subpoena for its bank records will ruin its business and endanger its clients. So they're fighting tooth and nail. They don't want that to come on out. Because when this one comes on out, it's going to unzip all the way here because they're looking at everything. Trey Gowdy is also launching a new investigation into the actions of the Department of Justice during last year's election and how they handled the email probe. And part of it, of course, is now the confirmation that former head of the FBI, James Comey, literally was drafting out his exoneration letter for Hillary before the investigation was even over. And then he had that strange press conference where he went right on down the list of felony Title 18 violations committed by Hillary Clinton, then exceeded his authority as director of the FBI by recommending there would be no charges. And, of course, then Loretta Lynch said, well, we're going to go along with that as well, their rationale being that Hillary Clinton didn't mean to do wrong, but if you actually know Title 18, intent is not required. Recklessness and carelessness can lead to a Title 18 felony violation. So this is getting stinky, and there's a long way to go, and it could unwind all the way back to espionage, could even unwind all the way back to the Clinton years in Arkansas, and how dirty that mess was. And everybody who's been caught up in that corruption over the last 30 years, they're going to be trying desperately to find some way to get out of the way or shut it down or block it. So this is going to be historic. This will be more historic than Watergate. Now, Hillary, of course, is on a publicity tour, ostensibly for her book, and basically is still out there blaming everybody and everything for her election loss. And the rationale behind it seems to be, well, of course everybody knew Hillary was going to win. The corporate media was saying she had a 93% chance of winning. So if she didn't win, something had to come from outside. It wasn't that the people didn't like Hillary or that the corporate media polls were wrong. It had to be Russia. And again, one of the most thorough, costly investigations in U.S. history has found no evidence of Russian interference in last year's election. They found lots of election fraud, all of it benefiting Hillary Clinton, but they don't want to talk about that. Over at the New York Times, they're still carrying her water. There was a photo of a female reporter consoling Hillary Clinton, and the lost leader was above all absolutely a feminist. And the thousands of women lives this feminist destroyed while Secretary of State, Libya, Syria, Honduras, were apparently of no concern to this reporter from the New York Slimes. And they're still out there trying to push that Trump-Russia link because apparently when President Donald Trump arrived for a lunch with Republican senators to talk tax reform, a protester managed to breach security or somebody arranged for him to get around there and just threw Russian flags on the floor as Trump passed, still trying to sell that image, Trump, Russia, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump. Now, the protester has been identified as Ryan Clayton, the president of Americans Take Action. He is a friend of Senator Bob Corker, and at one point, according to Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe, Ryan Clayton harassed, verbally abused one of his undercover reporters. So this guy's a political operative. This guy's a political operative. Now, as for Robert Mueller himself, and he really should think about stepping down, he is totally compromised. It turns out that Robert Mueller invested in hedge funds linked both to Russia and George Soros. And apparently during Mueller's tenure at the FBI, high-profile cases of financial wrongdoing within hedge funds that he invested in were ignored by federal law enforcement. They really are all crooked and corrupt there in Washington, D.C. You can count the honest people in Washington, D.C. on the fingers of one hand. Anybody who is honest and moral gets driven out, look like what happened to Cynthia McKinney or Ron Paul, and what they're trying to do to Donald Trump. It's one big corrupted cesspit. Forget about draining the swamp. Drone the swamp. It's going to be a lot faster. Now, interestingly enough, Arizona's Senator Jeff Flake, who's a Republican, has basically announced that he will not seek re-election to the Senate next year. And the excuse he gave in his press conference was he just couldn't stand Donald Trump any longer. But, of course, this is throwing the entire GOP into a tailspin because they're looking at next year whether they're going to be able to keep their Senate seat majority. So there may be some dirty dealing on that one. They may be literally trying to convince, coerce, maybe bribe certain GOP senators to step down. Give them enough money to have a comfortable retirement, and they step down, and the Democrat seize control of the Senate. And then we'll have a paralyzed government. I mean, look at the infighting that's going on now already. Now, turning over to the war zones. Apparently over at the United Nations Security Council, the U.S. was trying to put through a resolution calling for further UN inspections of the Syrian chemical weapons, which Syria surrendered a long time ago. And Russia just went ahead and vetoed it, saying this is a dead horse issue. And the U.S. keeps trying to flog this dead horse back to life. And they don't need to spend the time and the money and go through all of that. Basically, new inspections would be a stalling action to allow the U.S. to stay in Syria longer, figure out a way to turn the tables on Assad. Meanwhile, all of this interference in the rest of the world is starting to fall apart here. Iraq and Russia are going to deepen their ties, and the Syrian opposition and Damascus, they're talking about direct talks to just put Syria back together. Now, the Russian energy giant Gazprom was eyeing joint energy projects with Erbil. They're making all kinds of deals over there for the oil and the petroleum to be traded in rubles. And that, of course, is causing panic on Wall Street. There's a very serious article that came on out from Al Monitor, pardon me, basically asking, are Russia and Iran outflanking the U.S. in Iraq? And we saw how Russia outflanked the U.S. in Syria. Putin is a master chess player. And, you know, Russia and Iran are cozying up to each other. The United States is claiming Iran is subverting Iraq. And by golly, that's the United States' job to go on out and subvert other countries. They're cutting in on our action. Another article here in Fars News, and this really says everything in a nutshell. It's time for the American occupying troops to leave Iraq and Syria. Iraq doesn't want them there. Syria doesn't want them there. The United States has never had the permission of Syria's government to be in Syria, let alone drop bombs on their civilians. Meanwhile, Rex Tillerson is out there screaming about the Iranian militias. They've got to go home. They have no purpose there. They're not supposed to be there. Actually, the Iraqi government in this case has asked Iran for help settling this whole Kurdish thing down. So here you have the United States, which doesn't have any moral authority, no UN resolution or declaration of war by the U.S. Congress, going into these countries and telling other countries, you have to get on out. This place is ours. Now that Raqqa has been taken back from ISIS by the U.S.-backed forces, the U.S.-backed moderates, everybody's wondering, what will the U.S. do next? Because the U.S. isn't just going to walk on out of there. They still dream of a Syria that is balkanized with the oil fields under control of a government friendly to Western interests. And one of the things the U.S. has been doing is building new highways all across Syria, supposedly to assist civilian humanitarian recovery, but these highways seem to form the borders of a new balkanized nation. So everybody's wondering, what will the U.S. do now? Because nobody can take the U.S. word about anything that's being done. Meanwhile, U.S. warplanes attacked the Qusar district of Syria's city of Deir ez-Zor, killing at least 14 civilians and wounding 32 others. Basically, the U.S. has not commented on the incident yet, but said there was no real reason for the U.S. to attack the city, as neither the U.S. or its Kurdish allies are operating in the area. It's not exactly a denial, but something's going on. So, we are continuing to see Syrian troops emptying these ISIS bunkers and finding them loaded with the latest, newest weapons made in NATO countries. British 155mm howitzer. Then they have latest weapons made in the U.S., Belgium, and the U.K. They're finding them all over the place. We know who the real aggressor in all of this is. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, according to the Russian defense minister, right now ISIS controls less than 5% of Syria's territory. The war against ISIS is pretty much over, and what's left is going to be Syria versus the U.S.-backed moderates And again, the U.S. has no business being there. They do not have a resolution from the United Nations. They do not have a declaration of war from Congress. They're basically losing. They're losing in Afghanistan. They're losing in Syria. It's all coming apart. And they're going to continue to pour money and other people's children into these war zones to maintain the illusion they have not lost. Look how long Vietnam dragged on before they finally admitted defeat. Look how long Afghanistan has dragged on. Longest war in U.S. history, 16 years. Meanwhile, Turkey's largest military column heads to Syria's Idlib. And apparently they're out on what they're calling an anti-terror mission. They've entered the small border town of Kafr Lusin, then moved to the small town of Ka in northern Idlib. And basically the Turkish convoy has been forwarded to Idlib to take control over a key base that overlooks the town of Afrin in the Kala Saman in western Aleppo. So things are still out there. Too many players in the war. That's what makes it so unstable. Now, as you know, over the last few weeks, there have been a series of attacks by Israel onto Syrian territory, always justified because some errant artillery shell came across the border and hit a dirt patch somewhere in Israel. No damage, no injuries, no losses. And even Israel is saying it's an errant shell, but we have to go back and punish. Well, the Syrian foreign ministry finally went to the United Nations saying that it's time for the UN to take a close look at this because Israel is orchestrating these bogus attacks, coordinating with terrorist organizations to justify its own aggressions. Israel wants that Golan. They've already started selling off the oil and the gas. They don't want to give it back to Syria. It's always about that oil here. And apparently over in Iraq, Netanyahu is very upset with the Iraq forces capturing Kirkuk. Because Israel, as you know, was supporting the independent Kurdistan. And that appears to be just dead on arrival at this point. But what Israel wanted was for the new Kurdistan to include Kirkuk, which would give Israel access to that oil at below market prices. And now Netanyahu's throwing a tantrum because that's not going to work. I'm sure that Iraq will sell that oil to Israel, but they'll want a fair market value, and that's not something Israel's comfortable with. Meanwhile, over in Iran, the American Conservative has an article which is stating the obvious. It's a study in foregone conclusions. Trump is trashing the Iran deal to satisfy Netanyahu. And basically, he's echoing the hardline demands Netanyahu has made of Washington's policy toward Tehran. Decertify the deal, have Congress pull on out, renegotiate the Iran deal, or just pull out of the deal completely if there's no renegotiation, which would signal a military operation. Now, Trump is really obsessed on both Iran and Yemen. And the reason he's obsessed on Iran and Yemen, and especially Iran's long-range missiles, is out of concern that Iran may exert control over those two choke points in the Persian Gulf, like the Strait of Hormuz. And obviously, whoever controls those choke points gets to charge transit fees, make money off of other people's shipping. And that's why the U.S. had Saudi Arabia go into Yemen, was primarily so that the U.S. can set up military bases on Yemen to overlook those transit points. We're going to take a break for commercial. Right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Very interesting article, very cogent article over at the originalantiwar.com. And it's asking, are our Mideast wars forever? And it's looking back at all of these conflicts in the region, how they sometimes seem to turn around and go the other way. And you had the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters were run out of Kirkuk, and all the territory that they'd captured fighting ISIS alongside the Americans. The Iraqi army that ran them out was trained and armed by the United States. So we've got so many forces, we're involved in so many entanglements, we're very often fighting ourselves. This is not a smoothly run operation. It's quite chaotic. Chaos leads to mistakes, and some mistakes can lead to escalation. And I don't think we want to go there. Some people do. Some people just live to see a real-life mushroom cloud here. They may get their chance. More on that later. Now, peace activist Arthur West, he's chairman of the Scottish Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, is saying that what the world should be doing to end the North Korea crisis diplomatically is put pressure on the United States. Because more pressure on North Korea isn't going to accomplish anything in the face of continued U.S. belligerence toward Pyongyang. And so West is saying it's time for the rest of the world to turn to the United States and say, you know, back down. All they've been doing is testing weapons. And everybody tests weapons. America tests weapons. They test them over here on the next island over. Russia's been testing their ICBMs. Nobody's making a stink about that. So maybe it's time for the U.S. to have a slightly higher threshold for military action, like a country actually attacking us. Because if you think back over the last 16 years, at every one of these U.S. military interventions, they're all against countries who, A, do not have a nuclear deterrent, and B, have not actually attacked the United States of America. It's always the U.S. initiating these wars of aggression on the flimsiest of reasons. Saddam has nuclear weapons. Assad has sarin gas. ISIS. And they are cranking up the propaganda to go back into North Korea to get you to go. Apparently, nobody's buying this idea that Kim Jong-un is going to be able to bomb the United States from North Korea with his current state-of-the-art rockets. I mean, technically, the Taepodong 2 can reach the mainland U.S. It has a lousy history of blowing up during test flights. So we have this story. This is over in the New York Post, where North Korea may be building biological weapons. They may be producing biological weapons to unleash against enemy troops and civilians, including fake janitors lugging backpack sprayers containing deadly pathogens. Now, this is all coming out of a report, highly speculative, openly speculative, from the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School. They may be getting ready to do that. So they're trying to ramp up the fear to sell the American people on yet another war against a nation that has not actually done anything wrong other than to defy the will of Washington, D.C. North Korea, and for that matter, every nation, has a right to develop a nuclear deterrent to deter the invasion of their sovereign territory. That's what Iran wanted. That's what North Korea wants. It makes perfect sense when you look at who has been doing all of the invading and conquering over the last 16 years. Now, it's true that Kim Jong-un's rhetoric is hurting more than helping the situation, but when it comes right on down to it, North Korea hasn't shot a missile at anybody. They're just testing. Everybody tests their weapons to make sure they're going to work when needed. They tried to frame North Korea for that Cheosan torpedoing some years back, and that one fell apart. And for all this talk about North Korea's nukes and Iran's nukes and Iraq's nukes and everybody's nukes, please keep in mind that through all of human history, only one nation has actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction on the civilians of another country, and that is the United States at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And they did it primarily to prove to the rest of the world that we had these horrible weapons. Japan was already trying to surrender at that point in the war. When Russia came on in, Japan realized that was it. So they were suing for peace at that point. And Truman went ahead and dropped those bombs to prove to the rest of the world we still had that biggest stick. Now, Donald Trump is going to Asia next month. He has no plans to visit the DMZ, which makes a lot of sense. Why set yourself up to be a target? And it's not a very pleasant place to be anyway. Meanwhile, a lot of confusion going around in political media circles and even among the American people. What the heck are we doing down in Niger? And it seems like America has an unannounced war against sub-Saharan Africa. Niger is landlocked in central northwest Africa. It's nearly twice the size of France territorially. It's the world's fifth largest source of uranium. Its fourth largest producer. Reason enough for the United States to be there because, after all, we've just had a sudden 20% decrease in our domestic production capability. They got to make up that shortfall somewhere. Niger also has coal, iron ore, tin, phosphates, gold, molybdenum, gypsum, salt, and oil, with at least 40 billion barrels of proven reserves, along with plenty of natural gas. That's what these wars are all about. That's what AFRICOM is all about. Africa is the largest concentration of undeveloped natural resources left on Earth, and everybody wants a piece of that. And to heck what the Africans want. Now, the Pentagon, of course, now that the story is out about the ambush that killed the soldiers in Niger, they're out there saying, well, you know, as long as you all know, we do need a little bit more money for AFRICOM. Because they're now admitting they're carrying out routine patrols inside Niger. And now they basically want to say, we need more money. We need more money. Meanwhile, and this is going to have some blowback, Congress was caught completely off guard by this. The fact that we have 1,000 troops inside Niger on regular military patrol. And Senate Armed Services Committee members confirmed they're stunned by the revelation. They're supposed to be in the loop on all of this stuff. There isn't supposed to be a U.S. war anywhere that hasn't been approved directly by Congress. So that begs the question, where else is the U.S. involved militarily that we still don't know about? Because corporate media is not going to tell you. Now, earlier in the show, I mentioned something about people who are just living for the day that they can see a mushroom cloud. Well, you may get that chance. Russia is completing development and about to carry out test launches of its 100-ton Satan II ballistic missile, also known as the RS-28 Sarmat. Now, this is a next-generation intercontinental ballistic missile, can beat any defenses and wipe out entire countries. This has that maneuverable reentry vehicle technology we've talked about many times. And here's the kicker. It can carry warheads of 40 megatons. That's 2,000 times as powerful as the atom bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 40 megatons is a lot. Russia built the world's largest nuclear weapon, the Tsar bomb, which was specifically designed to get at hardened command posts in the United States like Cheyenne Mountain. But when they tested it, they dialed it back to 50 megatons. They were that scared of it. And it left a huge scar on the ground, which you can still see in Google Earth. This thing could just one of these warheads could wipe out a smaller nation. Forget about cities. We're talking about an entire nation gone. So let's talk a little bit about the economy, because we're still seeing the politicians in Wall Street out there talking about, the recovery. The recovery's going on. The stock market is soaring, and everybody who's already got money is making more of it. But the reality is that the growing debt across our society tells us the Great Recession started back in 2008. It's still running. They're just trying to hide it from you by rigging the stock market to make it look good, by lying about the rate of inflation, by lying about the true scale of unemployment. And all this comes back to that debt ceiling agreement. Well, at this point, they're just throwing the debt ceiling away. They're just going to print all the money that they need until finally the money is totally devalued and nobody will accept it anymore. And that's when things are going to fall apart. Meanwhile, over in Tehran, they're rolling out the red carpet for foreign investors, and they have over 100 major projects planned in Tehran for foreign investors. Now, of course, the U.S. is going to say sanctions, 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 which means that anybody who is in America or allied with America are going to be cut off from those investment opportunities. But there's going to be plenty of other money coming in from other parts of the world, like Russia and China. They'll be making money. These sanctions are causing more harm to the West than to the targeted nations. Remember that misguided oil price war they tried against Russia? And it caused a lot more damage to U.S., the fracking industry, Venezuela, than it did to Russia itself. Slammed Saudi Arabia. They wound up having to sell the first government bonds that they had in like the last half century. Now, speaking of Russia, as you know, they've been buying a lot of physical gold, a huge amount. At this point, it appears that they have basically tripled their gold reserves. Well, why would they do that? Well, obviously, people who think money should have value instead of being an instrument of debt, they want to have some gold. There's been talk of a gold-backed ruble for a long time now. But basically, Russia may be building up their gold reserves in advance of economic war with the United States, where it will be a real currency backed by value versus the U.S. fairy tale money coming out of the Federal Reserve. And that's a good reason to be owning metals, whether you're a nation or an individual. Now, Venezuela is behind on their debt. They're now facing 2 huge payments. Venezuela's been the victim of economic war from the U.S. going back to Hugo Chavez, and they're trying to deal with it. But, of course, the whole point of economic war is that you drive a country out of business and you go on in and buy it up during the bankruptcy sale. Meanwhile, 4 newly elected opposition governors have now pledged allegiance to Venezuela's Constituent Assembly, which previously they had dismissed as illegitimate. And so now it looks like there may be a new coalition forming there that might stabilize things, steady things down. Meanwhile, over in Catalonia, Spain is saying that they're going to take the so-called nuclear option. It's based on Article 155 of Spain's constitution that allows the parliament to take extraordinary measures to restore order in the country. Now, this move still needs to be ratified by the Spanish parliament, but Rajoy is saying it's his only option. From the point of view of the Catalonians, it's the return of Franco. And what a mess that was. And Catalonia's pro-independence alliance vows to challenge Madrid's dictatorship. So, Thursday of this week, Catalan political parties are planning to hold a plenary session in the regional parliament to discuss a response to Madrid's threats to invoke Article 155. This does appear to be heading toward a civil war. There was a movie that came on out about Hemingway and Gellhorn, and it chronicled Ernest Hemingway's life and his affair with Gellhorn, and a lot of it is set against the backdrop of the war against Franco. So, might want to catch that one on your Netflix. Little article coming out of Blacklisted News saying if you want to understand the next 10 years, you need to study what's going on in Spain right now. Spain represents a crucial microcosm for what is going to eventually sweep across the globe, which is the forces of globalism making war on the forces of nationalism, sovereignty, and decentralization. This is the beginning of the military phase of the establishment of the New World Order. Over in Germany, Merkel is in serious trouble. She's still chancellor for the moment, but her party took a major drubbing in the election. And apparently one of the leading members of her own party, the Christian Democratic Union, has said that Merkel is dragging the party to the left, and really new party leadership was needed. He even went on to say that he wished the Christian Democratic Union had a leader like the new Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz. And after the election debacle, in which the CDU had the worst results since 1949, the party leadership is obviously not ready to correct anything. And he's bang spot on with that. Prior to the election, Merkel started talking about maybe pulling back on her immigration policy. Nothing's happened since the election. Over in France, Macron is in trouble. Polls are revealing that the majority of the French people think he's a bad president. I think all the people of all these nations, they're turning on their globalist leaders because they're realizing that these leaders are not doing what's best for the nation. They're just trying to soften everything up for that big push for the one world government. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And it's getting rough for all of these globalist leaders there because apparently up at the European Union Parliament, Jean-Claude Juncker came on in to address the Parliament to be greeted by row upon row of empty seats. And the vast majority of the Parliament's 751 members were elsewhere. They didn't bother to show up. I think there was like 10. And so Juncker is angry, and he says he's never going to attend any of their meetings again. But the European Union is starting to fragment between the economic predations of the European Central Bank and the backlash from the open borders policy. It's really starting to come apart. So let's talk a little bit about political correctness. There is a professor at the University of Illinois, and Rochelle Gutierrez, and basically claims that math, algebra, and geometry promote white privilege. Yeah, this is the latest from the world of political correctness. Math, algebra, and geometry promote white privilege. And her argument is that the Greek terms and Greek lettering used as standard math symbology give Caucasians unearned credit for the subject. She seems to forget that the alphabet we're using is Arabic in origin, and they're getting the credit for it. Algebra is an Arabic word. The Arabs invented the zero as a placeholder. But the professor also believes that evaluations for math proficiency perpetuates discrimination against minority students if they do worse than their white counterparts. And she's out there saying that math teachers must be aware of identity politics surrounding the subject of mathematics. Well, way back when this country was being started, there was the declaration that said all men are created equal. Now, by using the word created, they avoid the discussion of are they going to have equal outcomes? And no, they don't. Everybody's a unique individual. Some are obsessed with success. Some just want to have a comfortable life. Everybody's different that way. When affirmative action came along, they were going to try and create equality of opportunity and guarantee that, but they were still getting inequality of outcomes. And so for political expediency, they changed it all around to have an equality of outcome, mandated. And that's when affirmative action really fell off the rails. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So we're talking about this University of Illinois math professor, Rochelle Gutierrez, who is out there saying that mathematics itself operates as whiteness. Who gets credit for doing and developing mathematics? Who's capable of mathematics and who is seen as part of the mathematical community is generally viewed as white. Well, you may be a professor of mathematics, but you're obviously ignorant of the history of mathematics, because anybody who's a serious mathematician understands there have been contributions from many cultures to what we now know today as mathematics. Yes, early geometry did come from Greece. Our number system came from the Arabs. So did much of algebra. Most mathematicians agree that the world's greatest number theorist was an Indian, Srinivasa Ramanujan. And why don't you know this? Or is it simply inconvenient to your agenda of wanting to say that mathematics is whiteness and we shouldn't be testing the students anymore because they might feel discriminated against? Well, that's the whole point of a test in school. You're discriminating between the smart, hardworking students and the dumb, lazy ones. It's got nothing to do with race and everything to do with performance. Now, over at the University of Southern California, they have another professor, a self-described black identity extremist, Charles H.F. Davis. He's the assistant professor of clinical education at the Rossier School of Education at the University of Southern California and chief strategy officer and director of research at the USC Race and Equity Center. And he's come on out and saying that whiteness must be by any and all means destroyed. And if you go over to his Twitter profile, it's all anti-white racial hate, glamorizes the murder of police. He's even got a page out of the old FBI phony Black Panther coloring book as an illustration. And by the way, in Chicago, a 56-year-old white teacher was simply gunned down in the street. They don't know why, who. All of a sudden, white people are now targets here. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. On this topic about math,
yes,
you're talking about?
Yep.
Two words. Galloping Gertie. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, you're talking the Tacoma Narrows Bridge that succumbed to...
well, we don't need no fancy pants mathematicians designing our bridges and calculating our re-entry angles for spacecraft. I mean, this whole math thing is just really over-touted.
Well, in the case of Galloping Gertie, it wasn't the math. It was the fact that the engineers designing the bridge simply were not aware of the problem that wind-induced resonance could cause. Of course, everybody does know that now.
Yeah.
That's the lessons learned from these disasters.
Right, well, that could be... Those resonance harmonics are all mathematical and frequency related and stuff too. You know, obviously that was that was a well-known phenomenon. You know, that there was nothing new about that, Mike. About bridges and resonance and harmonics and stuff. Ancient armies had varied marching cadences to make sure that where they would march armies across bridges. If they did it all in a regular cadence, it would, could cause bridges to collapse.
Yes.
So actually, the armies actually had alternate cadences for marching to make sure they didn't bring down bridges.
Well, they just had everybody walk at their own pace and minimize the stress on the bridge. But Nikola Tesla did a lot of experiments with structural resonance, and apparently there's a story that just with this little tiny magnetic coil attached to the steel frame of the building he was working in, he was able to, for all intents and purposes, simulate an earthquake. So we do know that resonance can happen.
Right.
But given the state of art of computers back when Gallup and Gertie was built, they couldn't do an analysis down the entire structure to really see how the resonance was going to work on out. I mean, this is in the days before SolidWorks. Have you ever seen SolidWorks? It's an amazing program. It's like a CAD program. You lay out your parts. You plug in what materials are going to be made of, and it will actually do a stress analysis on your design, tell you where the break points are likely to be.
Sure, architectural engineers make heavy use of stuff like that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I don't need no fancy pants mathematically trained chemist calculating dosages for my pharmaceuticals either. You know, just kind of wing it. A teaspoon will do.
Well, math
anyway,
is important to know here, and it's actually, I know there's a lot of people who say, I don't need to know math, I got the computer here. And to my mind, somebody who casually says, oh, I'm not mathematical, it's like they're saying, oh, I can't read and write. That's the degree of intellectual failure there. But a good reason to know math is so that you can spot when there is an error in the software that you're using or in your using of it. And I remember all the way back when I was teaching remedial math in Southern California, and the curriculum was there was a calculator, the kids were going to follow the instructions and write down the answer. And most of the answers were wrong because the kids were making mistakes on that calculator, but because they didn't have the math inside their heads, they could not see it. And that was a real problem.
Right. Yep. Yeah, we always used to have to show our work and all that stuff. But I must admit, probably even the average engineer doesn't make much use of differential equations on a daily basis yet. All the engineers have to take it. You know, you have to have the calc background. You know, so this idea that you don't need math. Heck, we in our present idiocracy, the average millennial can't count back change for $1. You know,
I've seen that. I've seen that at Safeway. It's ridiculous. It is absurd.
Mm-hmm.
The dumbing down of our society has proceeded quite rapidly. Okay?
Yeah, they would be quite angry if the numbers added to their EBT cards monthly weren't correct. Anyway, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Now, there is a bright ray of hope in all this political correctness because, as you know, over the last couple of years, the feminists have been trying to revive the idea that there's a rape crisis on our campuses and something must be done. And you need to go back and study the rape hysteria of the 1990s to see how political this is and how pointless it all is. And we were literally in a view where women were being told that it's okay to falsely accuse a man of rape. They would actually, it would be good for him to go through the experience. This actually came from Catherine Comans, the Assistant Dean of Student Activity at Vassar, who said that. And a lot of innocent guys did go to jail. A guy by the name of Gary Dotzen went to jail for 6 years until his, you'll pardon the expression, victim came on out and said, no, I lied about it. I didn't want my parents to know I was having sex with my boyfriend. So I told them I'd been raped. And they were being encouraged to do this. And it was all to build up this idea that there was a rape crisis, and the leaders of feminism counted on the votes and the money of women to protect them from us evil, drooling males who were out here. And in the end, it turned out that all of these lavishly funded campus rape centers sat empty and unused because there wasn't really a rape crisis. In fact, the FBI statistics, supplementary crime statistics, reported rape had become the second most falsely reported crime. Everybody wanted the attention. They wanted to be on Donahue or Oprah about this horrible rape crisis. There was a very famous hoax up in Davis, California, where this woman claimed that she'd been gang raped on the divider of the main road by these skateboarding teenagers, and now was up there and, you know, making political hay out of this thing, and they were screaming about evil white, wasn't even white back then, it was just evil males in general. And the city of Davis was on the verge of passing a males-only curfew when the victim was basically outed by the police as having just made the whole thing up because she wanted to be a star in the media. Now, there's a very good book about a lot of that stuff by a lady named Christine Hobbs Summers, who was a feminist herself. It's called Who Stole Feminism? And it really chronicles how the original equity feminism got hijacked by political opportunists and just turned into this male bash, militant, feminazi, gender feminism. Well, they've been trying to do the same thing more recently. And the good news is there are enough people in these colleges who remember what happened back in the 1990s, where they're saying, let's hang on a little bit. Let's bring back due process for students who are accused of rape. Because back in the 90s, even back during Hillary Clinton's campaign last year, it was always, you have to believe the victim, believe the accuser. Absolutely. Except for all those bimbos chasing Bill Clinton and Harvey Weinstein, of course. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Francis in Vancouver, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
I just wanted to talk about, there's an article up online and an interview with Greg Palast.
Yes.
And it turns out that Greg Palast went to school with the Las Vegas shooter from grade 2 to grade 12.
Okay.
And he knew him. He sat at the same workbench with him in shop class and everything. And so he assesses the shooter, and he's talked to his fellow schoolmates about this, and he's come to the conclusion that the reason that the Las Vegas shooter went berserk was because he was a hyper-intelligent guy, and they went to this high school that was a working-class high school in a poor section of Los Angeles. And I think it's called Sunny Valley or something, which is, he says, is really a dreadful place. And this high school was a really dreadful high school because it was oriented towards turning out working-class males with lots of shop classes and, cars to work on. And it was directing you to become a tool and die maker or a machinist.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like a fate worse than death to Greg Palast. And fortunately, he managed to escape it and get to go to Stanford so he could become a journalist because he had this hustler in him. But this poor shooter was stuck in this terrible trap of being oriented towards becoming a draftsman at Lockheed. And meanwhile, all these rich guys that went to Andover would become jet fighter pilots. And because of this great injustice, this drove this poor broken man to waste his life in gambling casinos and then become a mad shooter. And I thought the whole thing was nonsensical because, for one thing, I think that I've actually considered myself becoming a tool and die maker, and I think it's an awesome career for a man, or a woman for that matter. It's actually really consumes you intellectually and physically. It'd be a great job. And secondly, if that is the case, and this is a fate worse than death, and this poor man was rebelling against being deprived of what his natural intellect would allow him to aspire to, and that he could never go to university and know calculus and all this stuff. Why did the shooter pick on fellow working class people at a country and western concert to gun down and not go take a trip over to Andover and start gunning down all those horrible, snobby, drawling, upper class Andover brats?
Well,
it just doesn't make any sense.
It really doesn't, and I normally have a lot of regard for Greg Palast, but at this one, I think he's missed a few of the important facts. First of all, the Las Vegas shooter didn't waste his life away gambling. That was something he took up very late in life. He worked for Lockheed, obviously was allowed to use his technical skills there. He's had a couple of different careers, and he made his fortune in real estate. So he was obviously in a position to apply his intellect, and he made a lot of money, and he was retired. And what he liked to do when he was retired is go into Las Vegas, see the shows, and do some gambling. And apparently he was very good at it. Again, there are so many problems with the official story. I don't think this guy did it, this Paddock. I don't think he did it at all.
I don't either.
I think he was set up as a patsy.
Yeah, though I think he was involved with something really suspicious there. I suspect he was laundering money through the casinos for somebody. Like he was tied up with some sort of gun running for, and this is why the intelligence agencies are trying to cover up for it all.
Well, it could be. Certainly MGM Resorts is trying to cover up for it, and but again, there's a lot of strange things about this. The way that security guard canceled all his media representations. Then he went on the Ellen DeGeneres show and basically told the story he was told to tell. Ellen literally led him through it and then announced he won't be doing any more interviews. And that was kind of the end of that. We've had one witness who was directly contradicting the official story. Very young lady, all of a sudden found dead in her bedroom, natural causes. A lot of weird stuff going on like that. But again, in the end...
there's also been a fellow who's been gunned down.
I can't confirm that story.
Well, actually, I've just got it here in front of me. Missing Las Vegas shooting witness shot dead outside church.
Yes.
Chad Nishimura was killed after giving conflicting conflicting statement about Stephen Paddock.
Well,
so he was gunned down outside his church.
Well, I know he gave the conflicting
morning.
evidence. I can't get it confirmed that he's actually been shot. And we have to be so careful about hoax stories right now. Now, I'm going to do a little digging at this end because supposedly this Chad is from right here in Mililani, here on the island of Oahu. So I'm going to make some local calls and see if I can shake anything loose from this end.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. I love your show, Mike, and keep up the good work.
I will just as long as I can. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And let's see. There, we scroll that off there. Speaking of Hawaii, there is a big kerfuffle kicking up over our light rail system here. And I've talked about it before, where this thing has just gone years behind schedule, billions of dollars over budget. It's still making traffic impossible down there on Kamehameha Highway. And now there are questions being raised about possible misrepresentation of costs, intentional misrepresentations. And so basically the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii did a Freedom of Information Act request, and it raises even more questions about rail misrepresentations, and people are now starting to call for a full forensic audit. And apparently, Hawaii just passed a huge new tax increase to pay for the cost overruns on the light rail. And now the concern is that maybe the cost overruns weren't as high and that the Hawaii state government just decided, well, we've got the people agreeing to a tax increase for the light rail. Let's just gouge them for as much as we can. And it's kind of nasty, but that seems to be the way they are going with that one. All righty, little embarrassment for British Airways. And apparently British Airways was running a flight to London, and apparently the plane was infested with bed bugs. It was an overnight, a red eye. And apparently the passengers were all getting bit, and British Airways has apologized that they're sorry. But it's another reminder of how everybody is cutting corners. They're cutting back on cleanliness, maintenance, anything to just try and stay in business. And that is how fragile our economy, our entire system has become. There's no resilience in it anywhere. There's no margin for safety. Everything's just hanging on the very, very edge of failure mode. So... We're going to talk next about computers, and there are some new nasties already out there that are causing a lot of grief for a lot of people. So we're going to get into this after we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to talk a little bit about computers and the cybercrime situation is, okay, somebody's trying to call me. And so I'm not going to accept it. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about computers now. And we're going to talk about the malware, cybercrime that's going on. And it really is out of control. It's totally, totally out of control. And we were talking about this one a little bit, a little bit last week and yesterday. It's called Reaper, and it's infecting Internet of Things devices. Nobody seems to know what it's planned to do or when, but researchers are saying this could have an even bigger attack than the Mirai cyber attack of last year, which just paralyzed everything. Now, is this malice? Is this a cyber weapon? Is the U.S. getting ready to crash the Internet and blame Russia or Iran or North Korea for it? We've talked quite a bit about a virtual 911. This government is desperate for war, and they can't get any more traction with the American people because we are sick and tired of all the wars, knowing that we've been lied to so many times before. Nobody wants to, anyway. Let me just get something done here I got to take care of. All right, we're back. So they're trying to get traction for a new war, and they need a false flag. They need something to happen that will shock everybody, impact everybody. The threat and the harm will be immediate. Why not to your computers? And we've talked about a virtual 9/11 for many months now. As it comes on out that NSA has bored all kinds of holes in our computer security for their convenience, not yours, I might add. And unfortunately, it turns out to be for the convenience of the cyber criminals as well, who may, in fact, be within the government. The Kaspersky Group, this may be one of the reasons why the U.S. government is on the warpath against them. The Kaspersky Group outed a hacker collective, the Equation Group, as being part of the NSA. Maybe they're just out to make a little bit more money. Maybe ransomware is the virtual version of civil forfeiture, a government that is so desperate for money, it's just plundering its own people. Remember that story we ran last week over at the New York Police Department? They were being asked, how much money have you taken from the people of New York? And they said, oh, we can't tell you. The computer broke down. The database broke down. We have no idea how much we took from the people of New York or where it went. We just don't know. Poof, it's gone. Now, unfortunately, there is yet another wave of cyber attacks with ransomware, and it's already hit corporate networks in Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and Turkey. This coming from Kaspersky as well. And it's showing that the majority of the attacks victims are located in Russia, which gives us a good idea of who might be behind this. And the malware spreads through a number of compromised websites of Russian media outlets. So there's an agenda right there. Oh, you don't want to read Russia Today or Sputnik. Their websites are full of malware. Russia's Interfax news agency, one of the country's largest news outlet, Fontankia.ru news site, and another internet-based Russian media company were reportedly under attack. And an international airport and the metro system in Ukraine's capital city, Kiev, were also affected. This new ransomware is dubbed Bad Rabbit, and it demands a ransom paid in Bitcoin for encrypted files, which goes up the longer you wait to pay it. So where is the NSA in all of this? Ransomware has become a major, major problem. The NSA seems totally unconcerned. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Let's get a few calls going here. And we're talking about computers and malware. And ransomware is out of control. And it is not only costing America vast sums of money, it's costing us in lost productivity. And worse, it does represent a real danger to human life when hospitals are hit by the ransomware. And all of a sudden they can't access their patient records, which as part of Obamacare are mandated to be computerized now. instead of the old-fashioned paper files, which can't be hacked from a remote distance. And yet our government seems totally unconcerned with this, unless it's a government computer that gets attacked. So like I said, is ransomware the virtual equivalent of civil forfeiture? Just grabbing wealth from the American people by a desperately broke government that is still trying to fund more wars of conquest. All right, let's see. We're going to go to the phones here. Tom in Minnesota, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a listener for about a year, and I've learned a lot from you. And one of the things that I'm probably off topic a little bit because I just tuned in, but you've discussed about the likelihood of the United States of America collapsing as the Soviet Union, Russia and the Soviet Union did. And I don't understand how all that, the mechanics of how all that would work. Like one day, all of a sudden you've got thousands of people in all these governmental buildings, and there's a collapse. Somebody's got to come in there and kick all these people out of there, and they're going to say, well, what do you mean? We're not going anywhere. And how does all that transpire where people come in and all of a sudden you've got a whole new structure going? I know Vladimir Putin did it, but I don't know that much about it.
Well, you know, when the former Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of the people just bailed. They said, I'm out of here, because they were afraid there would be a violent uprising that followed, which didn't happen. There was a brief attempt at a counter-revolution, if you will, where the hardline Soviet took over the White House, the Russian White House, not our White House. And it did lead to a little bit of a battle, tanks in the street, but not a lot of bloodshed. As far as here in the United States, I would say that more than likely what will happen is that, especially as we look at this exploding uranium-1 deal and how just about everybody is going to be tainted by it, we could literally see the government bug out. Where they all say, all right, the police are coming to arrest us all, we're going to be heading for someplace without extradition. And the whole government could collapse that way.
Well, what authority are the police going to come in and arrest them all if the government's all gone? I mean, if they're all running for the border,
well, we're talking about the federal government. We're talking about the federal government. You know, the city, state, county, local authorities would still be in place.
Okay. So that they would step up and start running them out of town.
Well, they'd start arresting them on, you know, whatever outstanding warrants were being delivered by judges.
Okay. It just seems like such a dramatic event of so many different things that it's so contrary. You're in your 60s, so I grew up in 50s and 60s myself. So I mean, it's such a contradiction to what I'm used to in my view of America, and to see that this is about to happen, it's just kind of good to get somewhat of a picture of an understanding of how the mechanics of that could actually happen.
Well, again, you know, there's a couple of different recent examples you can use, such as the collapse of the former Soviet Union or the Romanian Revolution. That one happened blazingly fast. I mean, 3 weeks before it all went apart, anybody visiting Romania would have looked around and thought everything's running smoothly. The people seem to be content. They're not bothered by all the TV cameras on the streetlight poles. And then all of a sudden there was a riot at a sporting event that turned into a spontaneous political rally, and 3 weeks later Ceausescu was machine gunned to death on Romanian national TV.
Wow. Okay. Well, something to look forward to, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it'll certainly go in the history books. I mean, look at the downfall of Charles I, for example, or Benito Mussolini, or any of those dead Celtic kings who keep bobbing up to the top of those peat bogs in England. Sometimes there is a violent transition for a nation. No nation lasts forever. Rome, when it split into the Eastern and Western Empire, you know, Rome, pretty much everybody understands when the Western Empire of Rome fell and led to the Dark Ages, But yes, these things can happen, and in our age with instantaneous global communication, they're probably going to happen a lot faster than they happened in previous times in history.
So it looks I'm getting from what you're telling me is that most of the people in government positions are going to just run.
Well, your rank and file
and
people are going to
easy transition.
Yeah, your rank and file people are just going to
run, right?
No, the ordinary staffers and everything, they're just going to go home because they're going to realize there's no more paychecks. There's no reason for them to be there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I got a little better understanding.
Okay.
I always appreciate your show. I listen to it every night.
All right. Well, thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Mike.
We're going to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. Now, let's get into human-caused global warming, and I'm not going to inundate you with all the stories about how snow has come early to the northern hemisphere. You've already seen all of that. Claire and I, our old home in Snoqualmie, Washington, they're starting to get snow there. But what's really interesting is, all this talk about the Paris Climate Accord and how it's the path to a better future. Well, Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord, and as a result, other nations have pretty much started ignoring the whole thing. This is doing a report out of Canada where they're basically saying it never really made a lot of sense to begin with. It was just politics. Create a crisis, human-caused global warming. We must do something about it. All right, we'll subsidize alternative energy. We'll tax carbon. We'll do this, we'll do that. The Hegelian dialectic. But it was a con. It really was a con. And, I mean, if you look back in the late 1990s when Al Gore and his people were first starting to crank this up, they were making all these amazing predictions about how, like, Greenland was going to lose all of its ice in just 12 years. This came from one of the co-founders of Greenpeace. Greenland still has all of its ice. In fact, it's got a lot more. And this Greenpeace guy was forced to admit on TV that, yeah, we're just saying these things to try and get people excited to support what we're doing. In other words, yeah, it's okay for us to lie, to catapult the propaganda forward, to get people on board with our particular agenda, which is more money, more power. That's all it's ever really been here. Now, there's a new report out from a renowned Australian economist who is saying that renewable energy all around the globe has turned out to be a bigger scam, bigger than Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, bigger than the Enron meltdown. And basically, this Judith Sloan is out there saying what happened was these governments made a big deal about human-caused global warming and the need to find green energy sources, and then the voters demanded that they see something was being done, aside from the constant cry of taxes on carbon. And so a lot of governments all over the world fell into this trap of paying renewable energy companies that were losing money on the theory that it was necessary, at least politically, to be seen to be doing something about climate change. Now, down in Australia, where this lady is working, more than $2 billion taxpayer dollars a year are funneled to support renewable energy handlers by virtue of the operation of the Renewable Energy Target and the associated renewable energy certificates. It's a lot of paper shuffling. Remember, the carbon credit was the most bizarre commodity on Earth. It was, if you bought a carbon credit, it was a promise that the commodity itself would not be delivered. And so they demonized carbon dioxide. The EPA came on out and said, oh, it's a toxic pollutant. No, it isn't. It is an essential part of the chain of life on this planet. Commercial greenhouses will add intentionally more carbon dioxide to their interior atmospheres because the plants just eat it up. And they make sugar and oxygen, and together with the sunlight, they grow faster, they produce more crop. CO2 is a good thing. If we got rid of it all, we would all die. And again, looking back at all the dire warnings from the global warmistas, none of them came to pass. The polar bear have not gone extinct. In fact, they've they're on the verge of being declared pest animals now. The coasts haven't drowned, and they get straight. They're still out there screaming about the warming of the Earth's oceans. Well, there's a lot of geothermal activity that's going on down there. They just discovered another whole string of undersea volcanoes, many of them active. And if you don't know how many thermal vents and volcanoes there are on the floor of the ocean, if you can't subtract out their heat contribution to the ocean, then you can't make any estimates about what effect human activity is going to have. And let's be honest, even with all of our amazing technology and our industry and so forth, we are still pygmies compared to the forces of nature itself. But they're still out there trying to sell this thing because they want money and they want power. Now, let's talk about glyphosate here. And there's new research out that shows that glyphosate persists in soil far longer than anybody had thought. The official Monsanto literature was that glyphosate degrades and decomposes into harmless compounds after only a couple of months. But apparently a new research study from the European Commission's Joint Research Center and 2 Dutch laboratories show that 45% of Europe's topsoil contains glyphosate residues, demonstrating the over-reliance of the EU agricultural model on this harmful chemical pesticide. Now, a lot of countries are starting to push back from all of this. 6 Middle Eastern countries now ban glyphosate herbicides over its probable carcinogen fears. And these are governments that obviously are concerned about the health of their people. This includes Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman. They have all banned the use of glyphosate herbicides since last year. Contrast that with the United States government that is perfectly comfortable having glyphosate sprayed all over your food, knowing that it's a probable carcinogen, because after all, it does make money. And that's what we're here to do, make money. The United States of America has just been turned into a scammer's delight where we, the American people's only purpose, is to be plundered and looted by corporations, by government, by scammers. That's what our society has turned into. Now, I did post, a repost rather, to that wonderful monologue, well, it's not really a monologue, but that scene from HBO's The Newsroom, from the opening episode, where Will McAvoy is talking to this college class, and they're taking questions. And this young lady comes up and says, what makes America the greatest nation on earth? And the other 2 guests on the panel say, well, it's diversity and opportunity, and the other guy says it's freedom, blah, blah, blah. And Will McAvoy says, no, we're not the greatest country on earth anymore. And it was some of the best TV that people have ever seen. That's why it keeps getting reposted. But it's like that other gentleman who called in said, we're both old enough, we remember what this country used to be when it was the greatest nation on earth. And we have watched the decline decade after decade after decade. I've been following it more intensely for the last 24 going on 25 years. Ever since I ran afoul of the Clintons over the Vince Foster murder. This has been pretty much my full-time profession, is studying all this stuff and working it out. And it's painful to watch because like any other American born in this country, I do love my country and I love its people. And I respect its flag. I have some serious problems with the corrupt federal government. And by the way, so do most Americans. There was that poll that came out a couple of days ago where they were asking Americans, what are you most afraid of? And I guess the pollsters were hoping they were going to get ISIS or Iran or Russia or something. Nope. Hands down, winner by wide margin. Americans are afraid of their own corrupted government, and they have every reason to be. Okay, let's take a phone call. Don in Iowa, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yes, I don't have the scientific acumen that you do as far as the global warming. I used to just accept it. I figured everybody was saying this is the way it is, but maybe it was. But anyway, I made out like a bandit on this deal. I had one of those Volkswagen diesel cars. You probably heard about that whole thing. I had a 2009 Volkswagen Jetta TDI. And when I bought the thing in the first place, Uncle Sam gave me money. They gave me I think it was $1,500 tax credit because it was alternate fuel. It was considered good at that time for the environment. I guess alternate fuel. And it is the same thing that they gave to the Toyota Prius and some of the other ones. But this was a diesel car, but it did get good mileage. And I had no problem. I liked the car. I was going to keep it forever. I thought that would be the last car I'd ever buy because those diesel engines will last forever. But then Uncle Sam came to my rescue again, and they forced Volkswagen to give me. They gave me a lot of money. They gave me like $6,000, even if I wanted to keep the car. And then they gave me more than the car was worth to buy it from me. And so Uncle Sam was helping me out. And what they said was those diesel cars that they bought back, they're probably shipping them to Mexico and selling them down there.
Well, it could be. I'll tell you what. Stay on the line. We got to take a break for commercials. I'm going to come back to you after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Don in Iowa, who apparently was involved with this Volkswagen scandal, where Volkswagen started selling diesel cars. There was a tax credit for that. And then, of course, last year, when Volkswagen was reeling from the revelation that they had perpetrated a fraud against all their U.S. diesel customers, and in fact had been selling diesel cars that were putting out far more pollution than the United States currently allows. And so Volkswagen had to buy back 480,000 vehicles. And you're right, they may have just taken them and sent them off to some place where there are no emission restrictions and resold them there as used cars. Donnie, you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
Yes, that's what they told me. Even at Volkswagen, they said somebody there told me that they were selling to Mexico.
Okay.
But from my point of view, I thought it was ironic. Uncle Sam gave me the $1,500 in the first place because it was good, and then they gave me another $7,000 or $8,000 at the end when I got rid of the car because it was bad. So I can't lose. I mean, I made out like a bandit.
Well, you certainly got.
As far as this, yeah, I got paid off. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about the whole Hillary thing. These congressional investigations are okay, but nothing ever happens. What they need is a grand jury. They need a real attorney general, and they got to fire even Roger Stone. Before I turned your show on, I was watching Roger Stone. He's a full-time. He's an employee now of Alex Jones. But Roger Stone is the smartest guy on that show, and he said they got to get. I mean, he knows a lot of people in Washington. He used to be a lobbyist, so he knows what he's talking about. And yeah, what's his name? Sessions is not doing anything. He's basically letting his assistant secretaries of state, who were already there before he got there, he let them do whatever he wanted. Yep. He recused himself from Russia. He didn't have to do that. And Trump was right when he almost used threat. Before he was thinking about firing him, and he called him all kinds of names on his Twitter and stuff, but then he just let him stay there. They got to get rid of the guy. He's not doing his job.
Well, he's not doing his job. Mueller should be fired for his obvious conflicts of interest. And now it's come on out that when Mueller's appointment as a special counsel is actually illegal because Title 28 U.S. Code, Section 592, lays out the process by which a special counsel or special prosecutor is appointed, and it has to be preceded by a preliminary investigation And based on that preliminary investigation, then a decision is rendered as to whether or not they're going to have a full-on special counsel. You can't just come on in and say, special counsel, we're going to come and do this. So it's illegal. It's not even a legal operation. They're just ignoring the law here right now. Dom, we got to do a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And interestingly enough, speaking of Volkswagen's diesel scandal, a story just posted by one of the members at whatreallyhappened.com, London is now introducing a carbon T-charge tax on diesel and older gasoline-powered vehicles. Now, because of the severe congestion inside London, drivers who want to drive in and park already have to pay a monthly surcharge just to be allowed into the middle of the city. Now they're going to add another charge on top of that on diesel and older petroleum-based vehicles. Now, something interesting about the diesel engine, what that gentleman said was right. They do last forever. They're very reliable. And interestingly enough, the gentleman who invented this motor intended it to be fueled with just about anything of any combustion whatsoever, including vegetable oil. But there was a deal that was made during, I think it was World War II, where they were starting to employ diesel engines in military vehicles like tanks. And apparently the decision was made to have a special diesel fuel that was acquirable only from certain companies. And that was why the diesel engine has never lived up to its full potential. But they are amazing. There's a lot of cool devices out there. And the advantage of diesel in warfare is that if you puncture the fuel tank, it's not going to explode. It is fewer moving parts than a conventional gasoline engine. Diesels are actually very cool. All righty, getting on back to other stories here. We're back to the GMO. Now, up in Oregon, there has been an attempt by Oregon farmers to sue Monsanto over contamination of their fields with GMO. Now, when Monsanto first came out with these GMO crops, they insisted that if you had a buffer zone around your field, that the pollen would stay within your field. And that was nonsense. Pollen travels huge distances, insects, birds, the wind. And Monsanto started literally finding farms that had been contaminated with their GMO pollen and suing them for intellectual rights violations. And they wound up taking a lot of farms. And it was ridiculous for the courts to go along with this thing because none of these farmers wanted the GMO crops. Many of the farmers didn't even know their crops had been tainted by GMO. If anything, this wasn't intellectual property theft. It was an industrial accident, and it should have been treated as one. So some of these farmers have been trying to sue these GMO companies. And one of the problems that they dealt with was this idea of substantial equivalence, which is what the GMO companies came up with to avoid the normal procedures of testing products. Substantial equivalence simply meant that as far as regulatory policy was concerned, GMO products were no different than ordinary natural seeds and crops. GMO corn and soybeans and so forth were treated exactly the same as their natural counterparts. There's no need for a closer look. If it looks like a potato and tastes like a potato, then it's a potato. And the Oregon farmers have been blocked in court from suing with this idea that, so what if your fields got contaminated with GMO? It's still corn, it's still potatoes, it's still this stuff. You've suffered no financial harm. Well, now that the harm of these GMO varieties is becoming more and more obvious, the courts are reconsidering and saying that, yes, if these GMO companies, through their reckless handling of their products, have contaminated your fields, then yes, you have suffered economic damage. Just how much is up for debate here. Obviously, those farms that make their entire business on natural organic food have suffered the most harm. And a lot of those Oregon farmers were corn farmers, kept sending their corn over to China, which bans GMO. China would test it, say, no, this is GMO, and they'd send it right back. So, yeah, huge amounts of financial harm here. And again, looking at just how corrupted our federal government has become. The idea was that, even though these are GMO, and obviously there is some difference here between the GMO version and the natural version, we're just going to lump them all together and say the current rules will still apply. But they don't. We don't really know what the potential of long-term exposure to GMO is going to be. I'm still concerned over that epicite gene. Now, for those who don't know what that is, this was a strain of corn, a GMO corn, that was had a gene inserted into it called the epicite gene that would render any humans eating this corn incapable of reproduction. It would basically trick your body into treating human sperm as if it was an infection and kill it off. This was developed under a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it was acquired later by some of these other GMO companies. Now, what is the whole point of creating and then marketing a corn that reduces population? Now, the real danger is if that epicite gene got into the wild, and it was being test grown in open fields, not greenhouses, then it's only a matter of time before all varieties of corn become contaminated with this gene. Now, we have seen a major drop in population here in the United States, not counting the illegal immigrants and the refugees. And interestingly enough, the greatest decline in population has been among the Hispanic population, who are the largest per capita consumers of corn and corn products in our population. And this is one example of what I mean by just how recklessly these products get deployed. We're going to take a moment to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And the more you call in, the less you have to listen to me. So what we're seeing here now, there's an article in RINF.com where they're talking about how there's the beginning of rolling back this tide of pesticide poison, corruption, potential mass extinction, frankenfood. People are waking on up that this corporate-produced food, which is being done to maximize profitability, it may not necessarily be healthy. And when you couple that with a government which doesn't seem all that concerned with your health other than as a means to further plunder your wallet, people get very, very nervous about this. There's also another reason, and that is because these GMO crops are displacing other natural varieties and other species. And it's leading to a world in which there are only a few species of food crops left. But diversity is necessary to an ecosystem. You can't have an ecosystem that's only based on a few plants and everything else has been allowed to go extinct. There are going to be consequences throughout the entire food chain. And this modern industrialized system of food and agriculture seems to be the main culprit. Now, if you want to have a giant factory farm and you want to farm with the old traditional healthy farming methods, that's one thing. But we're seeing genetically modified food plants. We're seeing hormone-treated chickens and cattle. It's really becoming a very toxic diet that we're all being exposed to on a daily basis. And the lobbying groups for these big ag companies are able to hold the government back because the government would sell its own mother for $1. And that's really where we are. All right, let's go on over to the members' news page and see if we can find some stuff here. I think we already mentioned it a little while ago. Apparently, Bob Goodlatte, the Republican Virginia, and Trey Gowdy just announced moments ago a joint investigation into how the Justice Department handled last year's investigation. We did talk about that earlier in the show. And this is necessary. Nobody is above oversight in this country. That's the way it was designed. Nobody is allowed to operate above reproach, above criticism, and above inspection by the other branches of government. That was by design by the Founding Fathers. All right, we're going to take a phone call. John in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, it's education. I live in northern Michigan, and back in the 90s, our governor brought in the School of Work programs. Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Michigan were the pilot, the states to bring this trashy concept to the schools. And what they've done with as you, an educator, they've taken the communication skills away from these students as far as the language goes, and with giving them the Look Say program where they show a picture and put the word next to it without giving them the breakdown of the phonetic or the phonetic breakdown. That right there is destructive. And then they do not show children how to how sentences are developed or paragraphs or outlines. I pulled my children out of school up here because this area was used as a laboratory because it had basic middle class families with churches and this normal lifestyle, and it got really disgusting. The governors were allowed to control the money completely with the School of Work program. And another point that will reinforce this is a letter that Mark Tucker, who was head of the Educational Alliance, wrote to Hillary Clinton back in '92. People can find that online, and it will help them realize why everyone that is in the communities today are pretty much clueless and dumbed down. They do not have problem-solving skills because the math was put into a calculator. And if you don't have communication skills, you cannot put your thoughts down on paper and in a constructive way. And it was so damaging for the students, and it's criminal what they've done to the students. There's a gentleman up in Oregon that his name was Jed Brown. He's on YouTube. He passed away, but he's very Charlotte Iserby, who is another specialist in this area, said that he breaks it down as Skinner technology or rat psychology that they use for the students. But having these students out in the communities today, they were all in group group settings in school. They had 4 people in a group, and they didn't have to do the work. If one person did the work, they got the grade. And this is why many of them are incompetent when they get on the job site for being able to come across the problem and solve it. There's no logic in their background, and the history is a part of it too. And that's all these football players that are on the field today are outcome-based educated and dumb as dirt when it comes to real logic and problem solving. Have no clue what's going on, and it's just so tragic. And that's where the status of schools are today. These students cannot problem solve. They do not have logic in their thinking, and their communication skills are limited, and their language is being very minimalized with their devices now, and it is very destructive to a culture.
It really is, and it is sadly intentional. Pardon me. All public education traces its roots back to what was called the Prussian system, where the government of Prussia said, we're going to set up government-run schools, and basically ended the idea of parents raising their children, apprenticing them out to some local craftsman to learn a trade, and that was the extent of the education. And the goal of the Prussian system was to educate the children to be of maximum use to the Prussian government, not necessarily their families, not necessarily their local community. And all education has been kind of about that ever since then. And Andrew Carnegie, with his educational foundation, kept arguing that America's children should be taught no more than was needed to perform their functions in the factories and fill out the necessary paperwork, and anything beyond that was a complete waste of time and money. And when you're talking about outcome-based education, I saw that back in Southern California, where we were literally told, ignore the bright students in your class. Your goal is to make sure everybody gets up to that median grade, and then we will have satisfied the politicians that we're providing an equal education to all. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want an average student flying the airplane I'm riding in. I don't want the average student operating on my appendix. or in this case, my knee. I don't want the average student cooking my meals or designing the buildings I'm going to be living in. There is a reason why we seek out those who excel in these skills, and those are being robbed from us by modern education. And one of the worst offenders, obviously, is Common Core. And we used to have a neighbor here that was involved with Common Core, and she shared a lot of stuff with me that probably shouldn't, her bosses would not have been pleased with, but it was amazing. You're absolutely right. They're taking away the necessary skills to formulate language into words and ideas, and the idea of logic and rational analysis, that's gone. It's all see and repeat, obedience to authority. That's what Common Core is all about. They don't want thinking Americans because thinking Americans don't always do what they're told to do.
Oh, one more thing, Michael. Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld wrote a book. The title is NEA, the Trojan Horse of American Education. And in that book, he takes it back to 1835. And that's when they started developing the plan in the 1880s to do exactly what's in place right now. And they did bring up the Prussia and also the German school program. Our facilitators, and they're getting paid to do something destructive to your child. And most of these parents nowadays they were educated back in the 90s with this system, and so they're ignorant as to what really education is, and it's just a really destructive program. And Hillary Clinton is a major part of it. Just read her letter from Mark Tucker, and you'll really get an idea. And they developed this with David Rockefeller back in the 80s, the program. The Clintons also had a school in Arkansas called the Governor's School where they tested a lot of this out with students in high school, and it was just an outrageous school that they ran there. So it's disgusting.
Yeah, it really is, and it's cheating our children of their futures. It's cheating our nation of a better educated population. But again, the government is afraid of anybody who can look at facts and decide for themselves what they mean. And right now, the government is in an absolute panic over the fact that they've lost the ability to control the minds of America.
Well, I pulled my children out and homeschooled them, and it's just like it would be just, we didn't have a program that we had to follow. All you have to do is teach them the basics, the phonics. They didn't know how to sound out words, and my wife taught them how to do an outline on a subject. And then they explained what math was all about. We had to teach them how to count change back. They had no clue what that was.
Yes.
And it can be done, and it's something that hopefully most people can try to do. And then the vaccine program here, I was at a school board meeting, and I brought up the fact that it wasn't a law; it was a mandate from the state. And then the county nurse was there and said it was a law, and I asked her to show it to me. She goes, "Well, it's not really a law; it's a mandate. If they don't have 90% compliancy, then they start taking money back." So they're really into the health of your child.
Yeah, it really is. It's just all, again, it's all about money, power, and authority. And we are declining into a fascist dictatorship very, very rapidly because look at any fascist government in history, whether it was Italy or even under the Nazis. Education for the masses, the ones who were not pre-designated to be scientists and engineers, it was drastically simplified. And that's a hallmark of any totalitarian society, is they sabotage the children's ability to think. A good example of that is how history is taught. We're all taught history is name, place, date, name, place, date, name, place, date. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And you walk out of that classroom thinking you know history because you know about Columbus in 1492. But you don't know the politics behind it. They're literally blinding you to how this stuff works behind the scenes so that you won't see it when it's in front of you today. John, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Got more.
Yes, one more person.
We got one more. We got more phone calls waiting on the line. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go right back to the phones now. Alex in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Is they bring justice to the Clintons and the Obamas and all the people that were involved in the Uranium One deal, which I hope they do. We need to have indictment parties. I think we need to take 3 or 4 days off, and we need to create our own holiday. Maybe we should call it something like Justice Day.
Ooh, that would be a good idea.
Important.
That would be a really good idea.
We need to do it.
What I'm really expecting... Okay, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, no, I like the idea. But obviously we're talking about a scandal of a scale enough to bring down the entire government, certainly to bring down the Democratic Party. And everybody is out there. They're loaded for bear. They're going to try and fight this thing. The entire system is corrupt, and they're going to try and put on a big show about, we investigated, we didn't find anything. The American people aren't going to buy that one. If somebody gets proof like Trey Gowdy, I still think he's for real. What I think is going to happen is there will be a bug out where all these people like the Clintons, the Bushes, the Obamas, Loretta Lynch, all those players, they're going to leave the country, and they're going to go to some place without extradition, and that will be the end of that. They'll settle down with their ill-gotten gains and, sit on the beach and, whine and moan about how they were almost so close to conquering the world. I don't think any of them will stay in this country long enough for an indictment. And they've got the means to basically go anywhere they want on the planet, anytime they want. The big clue will be to see if there are sudden transfers of personal wealth to international banks and see what happens there. In fact, there's a good question right there now. Where is all the Clinton Foundation money actually being kept? I'm sure they don't have a closet in the foundation offices where they just have it all piled up in there. It's got to be in a bank somewhere.
Well, I just hope it happens. If they leave, I think that we could stop them, just like we stopped that Juan's wife that was wanting to go to Afghanistan or Pakistan, wherever it was, when she was trying to escape. I think, or we stopped the husband. I think we could stop them if we really wanted to. If our government, if there's enough honor within our government to really want to stop them. I also wanted to make a point.
Before you go further there, I have a comment to that. Okay, all that security and passport control and everything that you go through at the airport, the people with private jets don't have to go through that. So the reality, So the reality is, and these people are going to be smart enough to know it's time to leave before any official action is taken. In fact, I can imagine probably a lot of the players in this whole corruption scheme, this narcocracy, would be perfectly happy to just let them go as long as they promise to go and never return.
That's right. And I wanted to make another point. As frivolous as it may have been when Trump intervened with the NFL players taking a knee during the national anthem, I do believe that the NFL is probably an appendage of the deep state and the CIA, and they're a distraction of the government, of us really looking at the government, and I think it is a good thing that they're losing revenues and viewers. You've
seen how tightly the NFL football games, they're always military advertising, they wave the flag and all the rest of it. Football, American-style football, is our version of the gladiatorial games of ancient Rome. There to amaze and inspire the masses and bedazzle them so they weren't paying too much attention to what Caesar was doing.
That's right, and I'm glad to see it go down. And I wanted just to make this point. People may think I'm a conspiracy theorist, but it was the first Super Bowl, I believe, after 9/11 that the Patriots became so prominent.
Alex, stay on the line. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're talking with Alex in Florida. We're talking about indictments against these criminals. But again, the problem is, the further we get into this and we look at the relations between Sessions and Comey and Loretta Lynch and Robert Mueller, They're all part of that same corrupt center, and they're going to do everything they can to not let this move forward. In fact, I would not be at all surprised to start seeing a little bit of wet work where key witnesses are going to be killed. So, but again, if we can get people like Trey Gowdy to come on out with an indictment, at some point Trump is going to stand up and say, this does need to go forward. They don't have a president who's going to put the lid on this thing unless they got something really good on him. But there's no question the American people are waking up to the realization of just how incredibly corrupt the entire federal government has become. And if you really think about it, it does make a little bit of sense when you go back to understanding that the CIA has been running illegal drugs into this country going all the way back to Vietnam. And over a matter of time, that drug corruption eventually is going to reach everybody within the government itself. And anybody not willing to go along with that just simply doesn't get elected, or they get fired, or they get shoved out. Again, Cynthia McKinney, Ron Paul, things like that. So I would love to see an indictment of Hillary Clinton. I would like to see Bill and Hillary Clinton in jail for what they've done to the country, what they've done to me, and what they did to Claire. I don't really know that it's going to happen. If it does, I'm going to throw one heck of a party, and I'm probably going to retire from radio and blogging. But that would be the close of the story. But I don't really see it as likely to happen. Alex,
Michael, I wanted to say, yes. Hey, Michael, I wanted to say, as far as like even the NFL, I think it was the first Super Bowl after 9/11 that the Patriots started winning. And they won about 4 Super Bowls since then. And they're the biggest cheating organization on the planet. I mean, I remember one of the Super Bowls that they won. The announcers the whole game were saying it's like they're in the other team's huddle.
Well, I mean, there's a long history of sports teams cheating. Remember the Chicago Black Sox scandal? The mafia was always trying to fix these games, for the bookie parlors. So, yeah. And unfortunately, as our entire society does succumb to corruption, I would expect that probably sports are not as self-policing as they used to be. We know that there's this very sweet, cozy relationship between these billionaire team owners and the local governments where their stadiums are being built, where these owners of the teams, the ones who are making all the money off the gate sales and the TV rights and the rest of it, they're not paying for their own stadiums. The taxpayers are. Okay, Alex? Okay, sounds like we lost Alex. All right, before we take our next phone call, story just now breaking, just came on in. Remember the USS John S. McCain? Okay, Alex was still here. Okay, try and put him on again. Alex, are you there? He's gone now. All right, we seem to be having gremlins on our broadcast board here today. So before the next phone call, remember the USS John S. McCain? It was this Arleigh Burke ship that, like the Fitzgerald before it, rammed into a commercial shipping cargo ship, caused a huge amount of damage, deaths. Everybody was screaming it was a deliberate attack, and as it turns out, the Navy said, no, we just have incompetent commanders, and they've all been relieved. Well, the ship itself was going to be taken to Japan for repairs because it did suffer quite a bit of damage. And it was being sent to Japan, to their shipyards there. Now it's been rerouted to the Philippines. They were taking it across the ocean on what is called a heavy lift, where they've literally put this barge underneath it. They blow the ballast tanks on the barge raises up, putting the ship on top of it. That's how they transport a lot of this equipment. That's how they transported the USS Cole back to the United States. It's how they originally brought in that big giant radar down here in Pearl Harbor. But apparently the seas were rough, and the destroyer has developed a crack in its hull, which tells us that the hull may be much more badly damaged than was originally thought. I'm still not hearing anything. Oh, there we go. I heard it. Charlie, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I hear you now. Was that dumb
I
hamster, that hamster in the wire wheel? We need to tase him or something, wake him up.
Yeah, about that guy that he didn't want to talk like a conspiracy theorist, just so he knows a conspiracy theory sprouts where there's lack of probability and lack of evidence, and that's why you get conspiracy theories. As far as the educational system goes, if you grew up in the 70s, if you were in high school in the 70s, you could take a full year of electricity, and you could build a motor when you were a junior in high school.
Yes.
Now, I knew somebody that was going to be a mechanical engineer. He's going to be a freshman. He was a freshman this year. He didn't know the difference between direct and alternating current. So it's obvious that they want everybody in this country, after we get old and die off, not to be able to think critically. This is, you don't have to have two brain cells rub together here. They want everybody in this country to be a complete idiot by the year 2035, probably, before that.
Yeah, they just follow the instructions on the computer screen in front of you, and all will be well.
They want all these immigrants here because they don't become political. They're all worried about getting kicked out. So when we as a white race in this country get down to where a manageable number, who knows what their life will be like here, but it's all being done by the entrenched establishment, and you can point your fingers at everybody on this. That's, the top 1% and the top 0.5%. The old money that came here from, that landed on Connecticut, that type of stuff, where people got ancestors and money that owned New York from 200 years ago. Those are the people that are ruining this country for ordinary people.
Yeah, but the ultra-rich tend to do that throughout all of history, which is what led to the French Revolution and the guillotining of Louis XVI, the beheading of Charles I, and so forth and so on. Every once in a while in history, somebody will just take one step too far, and all of a sudden they'll provoke a response. And with this Uranium One story, it's more of the same thing here, because all of America is watching. What is the government going to do now? What is the corporate media going to do? And the legitimacy and credibility of the government and the corporate media are right on the line. They're on the line. If they try and hush this up or distract from it or cover it on up, the American people, I think for most Americans it's going to be the last straw. Especially going back to that poll which says more than 70% of Americans view the government as the worst danger to their lives. Okay, and apparently Charlie dropped for some reason. Okay, we seem to be having some issues with our telephones again today. So let's get on back to this. The Russian collusion delusion. They're still out there pushing that. It really is a dead horse that they're flogging on this one. But the reason they're doing it is very, very simple. They are desperate for a distraction from the Uranium One scandal. And anybody who's paying attention to the stories, who's watching Fox News, watching Lou Dobbs, they understand there is a there. This is not another nothing burger. It's not baloney, as Hillary's out there trying to insist that it is. And I'm sure Hillary's words are a comfort to all of her Hillaryites, her supporters, who are now going to be running around saying, oh, it's been debunked. Hillary Clinton said so. It must be true. But they're still out there trying to push that old idea. There was that stunt with the Russian flags at the Capitol building. It's all they've got to play with right now. There's nothing else going on. And I can imagine that Bill and Hillary Clinton and all of their associates, Huma Abedin, Anthony Weiner, the Bush family, the Obamas, they're all tangled up in this thing. They've all got to be getting very, very nervous. Remember, Obama used to tout that his administration was scandal-free. No, even before this came on out, we knew there was all kinds of stuff going on. So once again, I'm asking all of you to take these stories about the Uranium One deal and you just post them everywhere. It's all social media, and yes, it's being blocked, it's being censored. Reddit is automatically deleting anything to do with Uranium One, so don't waste your time with them. But email lists, comments, anywhere you can. We can push this onto the mainstream, well, the corporate media. We can force it into public view. We did it with the Downing Street memo, and we can do it here. And we need to do it here. This may be the last chance for us to get this nation free from the corruption of the narcocracy, and get us back onto a track of restoring our republic. Because I'd rather see that happen than a civil war or a revolution or the emergence of a dictatorship. So I need your help. All of you Rivero Rangers out there, I need your help to do this. Make this story live everywhere that you can. Interestingly enough, MSNBC did a segment. They were basically looking at the yard where they're setting up these sample sections of the new Trump border wall. And the segment was questioning, why do we need a border wall? Really, what a waste of money. And they got interrupted when some apparent illegal immigrants charged through the background. Oh, my goodness. That is amazing here. All righty, let's see. Going on back here. I got some new emails coming on in. Okay. Washington Post is just now breaking the story. The Democratic National Committee paid for the research that led to the Russia dossier, the one about Donald Trump and the two prostitutes in the Moscow hotel. Now we followed the money back to where it came. And, yes, apparently, let's see, Mark Elias, who represented the Clintons, hired Fusion GPS. So it's all starting to come on out. Let's see. Somebody just mailed in response to my question earlier today, where does the Clinton Foundation keep its wealth? And the answer is the Clinton Foundation actually has international foundations outside of the U.S., so a good part of the cash is already out of the country. And apparently a lot of this is detailed in the book Clinton Cash, but it's shell foundations. Let's see. Here we go. All right, that's something else. All right, getting on back to the news here. So in short, the Clintons are the Russia connection. And all these people engaged in all of these corrupted deals, not just the Uranium One sale, but, out at the Bundy Ranch trying to steal their land, all of it, because they were convinced Hillary Clinton was going to be able to steal the White House from Donald Trump, and there would be no investigations because the president would just shut them down. And I think this is the reason why they have been just so panicked ever since Trump won. And they're doing everything they can to corral him and control him. But as far as I can tell from his tweets, Trump is keeping an eye on this. And I think at some point he's going to go on out and he's going to say, yeah, we're going to let some real people investigate this, like Trey Gowdy. And I think you ought to fire Sessions. Sessions knows all about the Hillary Clinton scandals. He inherited all the files. Inherited all the files from his predecessor, James Comey, and he's doing nothing about it. Same thing with Attorney General, same thing with our new head of the FBI. Nothing is being done. They're protecting themselves. And the more they do it, the more they act like a corrupt dictatorship, the more it calls attention to itself. What we have here is a federal government that has sold its soul for campaign contributions and laundered drug money. And as near as we can tell, everybody's tangled up in it. Now, for most Americans, they think, well, there's a few bad apples. There's a few corrupt people. Richard Nixon was an aberration. We're coming to find out, no. It's business as usual in Washington, D.C. It really is completely corrupted. Irretrievably so, irrevocably so, unrepentantly so. It is hopelessly corrupted. And we just need to deal with that and start to talk honestly with our friends and neighbors about just how corrupted it all is. Remember back when Comey gave Hillary her get-out-of-jail-free card and Loretta Lynch went right along with it, and then we all find out that Lynch and Comey were tangled up with the HSBC money laundering case, where Comey was on their board of directors. Loretta Lynch was the U.S. Attorney for New York who gave them a wrist slap sentence. It's all about drugs and drug money. That's what we mean about the narcocracy. The biggest drug dealer in the country is the country. And for those of you who have family members who have succumbed to addiction to street drugs, now you know where it's all coming from. It's not coming from some swarthy gentleman in South America. It's not coming from some Asians wearing outdated silk robes. The drug lords are here inside our own government. It is as corrupted as it was during the years of Prohibition. And at some point, it all has to come crashing down. The only question is, will we have the nation survive it, or are we going to have to restart the nation? We'll be right back with our last segment. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And don't call in. I don't know why that particular bump is here at the end of the show, because we stopped taking calls on the last segment, so we can sum up. A few stories to share with you. Apparently, Iowa has just pulled out of Obamacare. So regardless of what Congress is doing, Obamacare is definitely in trouble. Meanwhile, remember when Catalonia was saying, pull your money out of the banks in protest over what was going on in Madrid? Apparently it's working. Bank runs have hit the third largest bank in Spain. Meanwhile, up in Italy, Lombardia and Venezia, or Veneto actually, have had their referendums for greater autonomy, overwhelmingly voted in favor of greater autonomy from the central government in Rome. And actually, if you've ever been to Italy, it does make a lot of sense. Because northern Italy, the Lombardia region, and southern Italy, Rome, it's almost like two separate countries already. It is so different between the two regions. You know, Rome is pretty wild and wide open and very urban, and up in Milan, which is where I was working, just really kind of uptight. And there's actually a lot of animosity between the northern and southern Italians. So, again, there is this continued push, greater autonomy. We're seeing the beginning of the war between those who want to centralize everything and those who want decentralization. And there is a wisdom behind that. Because one thing that the Soviet Union taught us all, centralized control doesn't always work. It breaks down. It makes mistakes. And when you have a centralized authority that makes a horrendous mistake, everybody suffers. Remember Lysenkoism? Where they thought they could pass environmental traits down lines of seeds genetically? And Stalin ordered everybody in the Soviet Union to use the Lysenko method. Was a complete fake, as phony as human-caused global warming, and sent Soviet Union into one of their major famines. They wound up having to buy grain from the United States. Huge embarrassment for the Soviet Union. So we talked yesterday about how the Pixel 2 XL screen is already showing burn-in. It's happening in as little as 2 weeks. Even cathode ray tubes held up longer than that. The iPhone 7 has been selling better than the iPhone 8, so Apple has discontinued the iPhone 7. Can't get them anymore from Apple. I imagine you can still get them on eBay or something. Meanwhile, this is a great story. China has invented a rice that can grow in salt water. There is a major breakthrough. They're going to feed millions and millions of people with this. This could save a lot of areas on ocean coasts from famine and starvation.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.